Welcome to another episode of Off the Rak. I'm Walt Rakowich, and I'm grateful to have you here as we explore what it means to practice transformative leadership. I'm even more grateful to welcome today's transformative leader, Tina DeSalvo, who's been guiding leadership teams for more than 25 years to bring about long overdue culture changes. Her clients include household names such as Comcast, Google, Johnson & Johnson, McDonald's, Goodyear, HBO, and many more. And Tina's clients consistently comment on her uncanny ability to provide the exact guidance their leadership teams need at precisely the right moment to build a psychologically safe environment and break through interactive barriers. Clients also tell Tina that she makes it faster and easier to speak the truth, to name the issues, and yes, cough up the hairballs that clog potential, all while working in partnership to design a more wholehearted, effective, and trusting way forward that has a direct impact on profitability. So Tina brings a vast and unique array of culture change credentials to the table. These experiences are grounded in systems thinking, intelligence disciplines, personality assessments and typologies, neuroscience, devoted practices of compassion, bearing witness, and mindfulness, all kinds of things that she brings to the table. And her tenure of successful client outcomes is layered by her love of interdisciplinary learning, her holistic obsession with how to bring about culture change, and her formative years in a tight-knit community that she fondly remembers as the stoop where conversation and community came together. So get ready to explore purpose-driven leadership as we start this episode of Off the Rak. So welcome, Tina. I am just thrilled to have you on the show today and really to have a person to talk about culture, which is, I think, near and dear to everyone's heart. But just thanks for being on.
Oh my gosh, what a pleasure. Thanks for having me, Walt.
So great to have you. But, before we get into this whole notion of culture, I think you and I might have shared similar households growing up. I had a Polish dad and an Italian mother, and you had an Italian dad and a Polish mom.
I did.
I was in Pittsburgh. You were in Chicago. So I have to ask you this question. Did you enjoy any blended traditions like eating pierogies and maybe eating pierogies and pizza at the same time, that type of thing?
Well, I don't know about eating those at the same time, but we were definitely a sausage forward family. It was either kielbasa or Italian sausage showing up on the table any given day. But yeah, it was definitely one of the greatest joys of my childhood and my adult life was living both of those different heritages. Did you
Absolutely.
have a favorite blended meal?
I'm sorry, what's that?
Did you have a favorite blended meal? What was it like for you?
Oh, we ate pierogies all the time. And as a matter of fact, I think one of the prerequisites of my parents' marriage was that my dad made sure that my mom made pierogies. She was a great Italian cook, but she had to learn to be a great cook of Eastern European foods as well. And I will tell you, Tina, now that we're going to get into culture, it sure strengthened my family culture. I just want you to know that.
In what way?
Well, I mean, it just made my dad and mom closer, he just loved her cooking.
Yeah. That's so funny you say that, Walt, because it was the exact same thing in my family, but the opposite. My mom had to learn from my dad's mother how to make, who didn't speak any English, who had make the traditional red sauce from where they came from in Italy. And so she learned from my other grandmother how to do all of that for my dad. So we had our Italian holidays and we had our Polish holidays. That was for sure.
Well, I will tell you that my mom learned how to make pierogies from my dad's mother as well. So just, we're even on that one.
I love it.
All right. So Tina, before we get into everything you're doing on the cultural side, which is just phenomenal, how did you get into this in the first place?
Yeah, thanks for asking, Walt. I have such a beautiful story that I write in my gratitude journal almost weekly. I used to work for the old S&H Green Stamp Company, which for some of us is a very big blast from the past. Some of us are probably still trying to get the chemicals out of our bodies from licking those stamps so we could get the toaster of our dreams at the grocery store or at the warehouse. But I actually grew up from the warehouse where people would actually go to redeem their stamps or find out what they can get. So this was the company that created the catalogs and all of that kind of stuff. It was my first job out of college. And they moved into an employee motivation and incentive company. So motivating salespeople to sell X amount of widgets, and then you get the toaster of your dreams if you earn enough points, or you could go on this trip and go to Hawaii, etc. So I was in the marketing communications department, and I loved that role. And I soon found out after about a year being there that there were a lot of teams and different departments that I needed to get my work done who weren't talking to each other, who were holding grudges, who had conflict or tension. And I just started to ask them if we could get in a room together and figure it out. And it was purely selfish, to be honest with you, Walt, because if they didn't get along, it was slowing my work down and I couldn't meet my client deliverables. So word got out with the CEO of the company, Stuart Harris, and the Harris family. I'll always be indebted to them that I was kind of good at this. And they said, hey, why don't you do this for the company? Why don't you be my chief culture officer? And this was the early 90s, and there weren't books written about it back then. It was just maybe starting to surface in the mid 90s. And I said, what's culture? And he said, you're doing it. And I became the person in the organization to bring teams and groups together to design conversations and create safe spaces for us to deal with conflict in a healthy way. And it kind of just came natural to me. And I did that for several years, and I was in love with it. And I thought this was going to be the place I was going to retire from. But the CEO of the company, Stuart Harris, he ended up having a fatal condition, and he wanted to sell the company and move back to Israel to live his last days with his family. And he sold the company, and I was absolutely heartbroken. I just didn't know what I was going to do. And he and his family approached me and said, you should really do this for a living. You're built for this. You're wired for this. Go out on your own. And I said, I don't know the first thing about doing this. But he had been previous a pretty big cheese at IBM. And he said, I'll teach you and I'll mentor you. And they also invested in me financially. And I said yes to that, as scared as I was. And I said yes to the investment, but only with the commitment. And this comes from the values of my parents. I'm going to pay you back. I just don't know how, and I just don't know when. And I did. I'm very proud to say that I gave that money back. And it took years for me to do it. But my parents always said, even if all you do is send $5 in an envelope, just every week, whatever you can afford, so they know you're going to do it, you're on it. And that's what I did. I was sending $20 when I could, $100 when I could. And then before I knew it, the checks were getting bigger and I was launched. And so I'll always be indebted to them and the family for seeing something in me that, quite frankly, without that prompt, I really don't think I'd be doing what I'm doing. And he was absolutely right. I'm meant for this. And 25 years later, I'm still doing it and can't imagine doing anything else.
We all need an angel in our lives, don't we?
Gosh, don't we? I know. So grateful.
Well, you talked a little bit about values, and in one of your posts, you talked about your dad and how he was connected to his values, and you just mentioned that a minute ago. You talk a little bit about him and how he inspired you.
Yeah, my dad was, he died when he was 95. He was still going to the gym 3 days a week and driving, even up until those last days. And he was a World War II veteran. He was a mechanic on an aircraft carrier. All he wanted to do was fly. And because he went into the Navy, it was his first time leaving Chicago. He really got a taste of freedom, in his view, what that word meant to him. And that feeling of being away from home and running his own life, even though he was in the military, it was a bit of a contradiction, really gave him the taste of what that's like for him. And freedom was always one of his core values, not only for the fight for his country, but in his own life. So he worked so hard to try to start his own business so many times. And he was just never deterred. He had gumball machines that he sold and filled. He was trying to, he opened up a dry cleaning business. I mean, I could list the laundry list of businesses he tried, but he always instilled in me, Tina, if you could work for yourself and create the life and schedule you want, you should really try to go for that. And he had 5 kids. And for him, what he wanted to do most was spend time with us. So he was always trying to find a way to make it work so that he could be with us and didn't do work on his own time. And so he talked about that a lot. And then I got to watch him as a little kid and then later in life really try to stay true to what was really valuable to him, his family, freedom, responsibility. He definitely taught us responsibility. And he really lived by that. He was very disciplined. He had a system and an order for everything. And he talked about it a lot. And so it was the first time in my life that somebody talked about values, lived them, role modeled them, and made decisions based on them. I mean, he would say yes or no to things and choices in life based on living his values. And nobody ever taught me that in school or in college. That wasn't a thing to learn. So I was always really curious about what does it mean to live a life in alignment with your values.
And how about your mom, Tina? I mean, can you talk a little bit about the influence that she had in your life?
Yeah. My mom and dad were yin and yang. So my dad was a street smart, very independent Chicago Italian. He was shining shoes when he was 3 years old on State Street to bring home a nickel to try to help feed the family. And my mom was this quiet, compassionate, empathetic, she's just lighthearted Polish woman who saw the best in everybody. And her value in life is you get what you look for. And she talked about that a lot. And she always chose to see the good. She always chose to see the good in a person or in a situation and try to understand, even if it was tough or why somebody might be behaving in a way that really isn't working for anybody, why they might be able to, why that might be going on for them. And she always said, Tina, you get what you look for. If you look for good, you find it. If you look for bad, you find it. Make your choices clear. Be conscious of what you're looking for. And so from the two of them, I really, I'm indebted to some of the life lessons I've learned.
I love people who have a glass half full attitude about life. Sounds like she was.
Yeah. Yeah, she was. Yeah.
So Tina, I've read enough about you to know that you're a big believer in self-reflection.
Yeah.
Kind of knowing yourself before you consider how you're influencing other people. And I understand that one of the main tenets of your work with leadership teams is a focus on the idea that sort of our inner world affects our outer world, kind of the way we see each other, or see ourselves, et cetera. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. Yeah, that's probably why I wake up every day, Walt, and why I'm so excited to do what I do. I always tell leaders, and this wasn't my original quote, we affect the weather in the room as soon as you walk into it. And we've got 3 impacts we can have every time we have an interaction with somebody: positive, negative, or neutral. Let's try to go for positive, especially if you're a people leader, because your influence is so great. And we're so unaware of these unconscious thoughts or influences on how we perceive or experience the world. And without reflection, there's no learning. If we're not sitting back and thinking about, how did I respond to the day? How did I respond to that email? How did I handle that stressful conversation today? What came up for me as I was having that stressful conversation? Was I afraid? Was I worried about my job? Was I worried about looking foolish? Was something getting triggered in me? Was I angry? If we don't unpack that stuff, we're just on repetition and we're in constant reactive mode. And I'm a big fan of reflecting so we can create a little space and choose our response, especially if we're a leader and especially if we're a people leader, because people are looking to us for guidance and as a signal and a compass on how we should be feeling about the world. So self-awareness and emotional intelligence is what I do every day, is we teach what we want to learn. So I'm still a work in progress. We're all still a work in progress. But if we don't reflect, we can't understand.
I'm kind of curious, is there a meditative or a spiritual component to it, at least for you?
For me, there definitely is. Yeah, I'm a devoted meditator for sure. I've been a journaler since I was a little girl, very much. And I definitely believe in, especially later in life. Well, as I was progressing in my career and becoming a senior leader, and then I went out on my own, and then I started to take all of these advanced education classes. All of those tools and models are so useful every day. But I started to realize that I gave more reverence to models and intellect and diminished and eclipsed the ability of my intuition. And without some type of journaling or reflection or just quiet, like literal, just quiet time, there's an inner voice that I can't hear. And I really believe that we all have that inner voice, and that inner voice is connected, my own personal belief, to something much bigger than me. And I want to tune into that because I can't figure everything out with my head, and I don't need to figure everything out just with my intellect. But where does the heart come in? Where does the wisdom and the intuition come in? Where does the wisdom of my ancestors and people that came before me come in? That's all in us. I want to listen to that because it doesn't need to depend on just what I know. It's so much bigger than that.
Yeah, it is. I believe that too. You also talk a lot about purpose. When I was a CEO, focusing my company, at least, or our company, on purpose, I think really helped us immensely in a difficult time that we were going through.
Right.
So you might call that a crucible moment. I don't know,
Mm-hmm.
but can you talk a little bit about your client approach to purpose and sort of why you created something called the Living Life on Purpose program,
I did.
but why did you create that? And and talk a little bit about that approach.
Yeah. I was really curious when I was a young leader, and then when I started the business, about why do I wake up? What am I waking up every day to do? And what am I being pulled by? What's the compass in which I want to make decisions? So there's the grand purpose in life, and I believe there's a reason for all of us to be here. Hopefully, my why is to serve in some way, and I happen to have these particular skills, so that's the way I serve. You have your way, we all have our way. But when things get really tough, your crucible moment, if you don't know why you're still showing up, if you don't know why you're going to face the storm and go, because the only way out is through, you really need a much bigger why, but a day-to-day why. And our life changes. We go through stages where we have young children, and our roles, all of the roles we play in life, most of our attention has to go to raising young children. Then we move into a different phase, and maybe we're in a phase where we have to take care of our parents, and a lot of our energy has to go through that. And we want to do that with some compass and guideposts and some values to be in alignment. So the Living Life on Purpose program helps leaders assess their values every day and every year, the roles they play in life, how those sync up, and then how do the thoughts and limiting beliefs get in our way that try to convince us it's okay to be out of alignment with ourselves? And how do we also recognize what it feels like when we're out of alignment with ourselves? And then how do we come back to center? So it's one thing to map out what you want to do and what you value, but it's another thing to bring yourself back to alignment with practices that help you reflect on, gosh, I beat myself up a lot. I have a lot of imposter syndrome, or I have a strong inner critic, or when this situation comes up, I shrink. Or, a lot of women find themselves apologizing in meetings, and I look at them and I can't even figure out for the life of me, what are you apologizing for? Talking, trying to get in there? Where does that apology come from? What's the shrinking there? That's a version of us being out of alignment. So we need to know what we're going for. We need to know what compass is what direction the compass is guiding us in. But we also need to know how to get back on track. And that's where the reflection and the understanding all of these thoughts in our heads and reframing come into mind. So I think it's really important for leaders to know and to be able to choose the response, and then have practices to get back to center.
So that's powerful. And you and I know, share a favorite book, and I've written about it. And it's called Man's Search for Meaning, and written by
Mm-hmm.
Viktor Frankl.
Mm-hmm.
Would you share your thoughts on the importance of that in a leader's mind?
Yeah. My first leadership course, I was 25. They gave us that book to read, and I was thinking, why are we reading this in a leadership class? I need to know how to be a better leader. I really was quite confused. And when I was done reading it, like you, Walt, I'm sure it was it was such a powerful it had such a powerful impact on me. And there was one quote that made all the difference for me, and I might botch it up a little bit. In between stimulus and response, there is a space. And in that space lies our freedom to choose our response. And he, under the conditions that he was in Auschwitz. He survived Auschwitz. They took everything away from him, his family, his belongings, almost his life.
I think he was in a concentration camp for over 3 years, wasn't he?
And one of the worst ones. Yeah, Auschwitz.
Right.
Yeah. And most of the prisoners attribute the ones that were able to live, they said it was because of him, because he kept reminding them they can take all of that away, but they do not control how you feel about yourself. Mm-hmm. And how you want to choose to respond to this. And every time I run into adversity, I think of him and that quote. He inspired me to actually visit Auschwitz. I went on a bearing witness retreat to actually walk the camp to understand what it must have been like for him. And I just needed to know how somebody could survive something with that much mental strength and resilience and save so many people. So I think, gosh, if he can do it in such horrible conditions, what a reminder when I'm dealing with adversity or when we are dealing with adversity. We can choose our response if we just take a breath in between stimulus and response. I'm getting triggered. How do I want to handle this? But it does take a breath or two.
Yeah, but and part of it for him too was just he kept this focus of purpose in his mind, like he had something to live for.
100%, yeah.
Right. So meaning in his life and purpose meant a lot, and so therefore, since he had that to focus on, he could then deal with the adversity that came about every day. Right.
Yeah, and I think it was both, Walt. I think he knew. I mean, they took away most of his family. I mean, they killed his wife and his children.
His wife, yeah.
But he did have purpose with his vocation. And he knew I could help people even in day to day in these situations. And so that purpose was definitely the driver. It was service, even in those conditions. His purpose was service. Really?
Yeah, I know he thought about coming to the United States and teaching and all those sorts of things. Just kept him going.
Yeah. Yeah. It's amazing. Yeah. It's truly inspiring. I read that book. I don't know. Have you read it more than once? I go back to it occasionally.
I think I've read it twice.
Yeah. Yeah.
But actually, I don't know that I read it again now. I just go back to snippets of it,
Yeah. Yeah.
and pick up on things. But anyway, there was definitely a powerful book, and I think it definitely becomes an engine as to how you respond to certain things in the workplace, for sure.
Yeah, I agree.
So Tina, just to switch gears a little bit, one of the topics that I cover in my book Transfluence is about the importance of overcoming your fear as a leader. Which I think is a big deal. And I think most leaders don't focus on it, but they have it. Mm-hmm. How do you help leaders bring about change when they struggle with anxiety?
Yeah, I'm kind of curious too. I think you have a lot to say about this, Walt. I was thinking about the situation you were in with your crucible moment, and especially male leaders and senior leaders. I think there's this notion that we're not supposed to be afraid or never let them see you sweat. And there's such this balance of being authentic, but also being an inspiring leader. So I'm just kind of curious, especially for men, I think that's really difficult. How did you handle it? And then I can add on other thoughts. But what was that like for you as a male senior leader?
I just came to the realization that I did not have all the answers. Mm-hmm. And once I was able to articulate that to everybody around me, and I felt okay about it, that I was still the person that had to make the ultimate decision, but that I didn't have the answers, I think it would became a little bit more empowering for the people around me, because they knew that the likelihood is that I trusted them, that they were going to have the right answers ultimately, and we were going to do what they, felt best to do. And I think it just made me a better leader. I felt like I could be the conductor in the orchestra in some respects, but I didn't need to have all the answers. And I was totally good with that.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I had to come to that. It was a vulnerable moment for me. And I had to kind of come to that realization over time.
I bet along the way, though, that's a zigzaggy journey with a beautiful outcome that allowed you to be an even stronger leader. But on some of the zigs and the zags, when you had to make a decision and you were afraid, I'm sure there were some voices in your head.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
What were some?
Yeah, well, those voices are still in my head today. I mean, I don't think we ever completely move on from fear.
Yeah.
I think we can learn to deal with it and become more self-aware of it, and therefore defeat it. But I don't think we could ever completely, move on from anxiety in life.
Yeah. 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 And it's interesting. I'm getting more and more requests to help leaders coach through anxiety, help people reframe and deal with their own anxiety. And I think there's a couple important methodologies there. One is the circle of control. Anxiety stirs up a lot of stuff because we don't know. Our mind wants to know what the future is going to be like and can give me any reassurance. And in many situations, we can't.
Right.
And so how can we create some agency by focusing on what we can influence and control and letting go of what we can't? That's one method. But we also have to be really cognizant of the voices in our head that are creating distortions that are making the anxiety worse. Oh my gosh, if I don't make this decision well, I'm going to get the worst performance review and I'm never going to get that promotion. This all or nothing catastrophic thinking. If my team doesn't succeed, we're going to be toast. The whole thing's going to fail. And so we've got to be really mindful of how these spins get a little bit out of control and work a lot with reframing. Let's focus on what we can control. Let's focus on what we can influence. And what are multiple other perceptions? Give me some other ways that we can perceive what's happening so that we don't let this anxious mind move out of control. Because there's always going to be something that stirs things up for us. One of my favorite leaders that I'm working with now, he's the president of a very large division. He said this to me years ago, that he's always inspired to be uncomfortable every day because he doesn't want to get complacent in not sitting in discomfort. He wants to sit in discomfort so that it becomes comfortable being uncomfortable, because otherwise we can create a little bit of a cocoon in ourselves. And so there's lots of different ways we can stretch, but we also have to watch where the mind goes when we're afraid.
Isn't that the truth? It's and this whole notion of feeling like we're in control or having to feel like we're in control when in fact we never are is
we
something
like to believe it.
We like to believe it, but we just aren't, right?
No.
And that in and of itself will create a tremendous amount of anxiety.
Yeah.
So, Tina, on your website, there's a quote by Aaron Digman that says, "An organization's health is directly proportional to the speed at which truth passes through it." And I love hearing this because I write about the importance of transparency in building great cultures. I think transparency is so important.
Yeah.
Can you tell us why that's been such a critical need in your experience?
Yeah. This stems all the way back from my childhood and my early S&H days, Walt. I was born really late in life and had 4 siblings that were all 11 to 19 years or so older than me. And my parents were Depression era parents and very prideful. And so whenever anything was going wrong in the family or we were struggling in any way, they never wanted anybody to know about it. And we barely talked about it. And I was always fascinated with that of why not? What are we afraid of to talk about it? And why are we afraid if anybody knows about it? And then fast forward when I went into my S&H and other jobs and other leadership roles, I just found the same thing. We bring our family systems into our corporate systems, and we're afraid to talk about stuff. And there's a bazillion reasons why. So I believe in transparency, being as transparent about where we're headed, how we're doing in the business, changes we're making, and what the why behind them. And not everything's going to be rosy, but then there's also the day-to-day team meetings where it's just not safe for a variety of reasons, too many that we could even cover on this call. But I always ask my teams and my leaders, what are we doing to intentionally build what I call the container? The container is a metaphor for how much a team can contain. And if you imagine a jar, that a cookie jar, a visual on a cookie jar, the wider and bigger and taller and thicker the walls of the cookie jar, the more cookies it can hold, and the more resilient it's going to be against stress. If the cookie jar falls off the counter, and it might not break very easily if it's not made of crystal, but it's made of something much thicker. And so what does a leader do intentionally to create a stronger container over time so people feel safe enough to say, I'm struggling in my role, or I'm confused, or when you let down, when you said you were going to do this and you didn't meet your commitment, it really affected my work. And how we can have these harder conversations without taking it personally or derailing a whole team. But I'm never not stunned at how difficult that really is for a variety of reasons. And so we want to be transparent with the entire organization, and then day to day, what does it take to really be truthful? And then the reason I love Erin's quote is, leaders assume through surveys and engagement surveys and skip levels and all the methods we put in to try to understand how people are feeling that they're getting truth. And they're doing all of the right things to try to get truth. But the fact of the matter is that their title and their status will always create a filter and a blind spot in the actual truth of what's happening in the organization. So my challenge to every leader, especially the higher up they go, is how are you ensuring truth is passing through your organization, and how fast? And are you willing to hear it? That's the other side of the coin.
Yeah, and I would think that some of that filter gets broken down to the extent that you as a leader are truthful yourself.
Totally.
And, I used to always say that telling the truth starts with being truthful with yourself.
Yeah.
So, if you can be truthful about the little things that you do and that you say when no one is looking, then you can be truthful with the big things in life. And I think it's important that your people see that in you. And if they see that in you, I think they'll bring to you a lot more truth because they know that that's really what's important to you.
Yeah, 100%. 100%. I worked with a senior leader and he was a phenomenal leader while he was in his role, phenomenally, really inspired excellence. He never let anybody know when he was struggling or that he made a mistake.
Yep.
And people thought he was a machine. I mean, they would say he's just a machine. He works endlessly. He inspires perfection. He seems to be imperfect himself. And I remember he had this big meeting every year with his top 500 leaders, and he was willing to do this on the fly. I said, would you let me interview in front of you, all the leaders? And the only way I'll do this is if you don't know what I'm going to ask before. And I had gained a lot of trust with him. I'd been working with him for years to help shift the culture of his organization. He had tens of thousands of employees. Nobody really ever got to see him the way I got to see him. Mm-hmm. And it changed everything for his top leaders because they realized he does worry. He does suffer. He does get anxious. He does sweat it out. And we have to be vulnerable enough to show that to folks, that we're all imperfect. And he was being truthful to himself, but he was really guarded on showing that to anybody. And the day that he did it, it changed everything.
That's, that brings back that whole notion of vulnerability. Mm-hmm. If you're able to be vulnerable, then you can help foster healthier and probably happier teams because people see you and they know they can then be vulnerable because you are too.
Absolutely.
So, Tina, I understand that one of your clients likes to say that a leader can never have a bad day. I'd like you to share your perspective on leading with perfection versus leading with authenticity.
Yeah. Yeah. And it sounds like you have a lot to say about that as well, Walt. The check-in question I used that created that response. One day I did a check-in question with a bunch of senior leaders and said, leadership means, or leadership is, I forget, fill in the blank. And then they all went around and gave us the fill in the blanks. And this one leader said, leadership means you can never have a bad day. And when we double clicked on that a little bit, the notion of not showing people you're having a bad day because they're counting on you. It's like you and I fly a lot. When there's a lot of turbulence, I find it really helpful to know that the pilot isn't freaking out on the intercom. One of my favorite things they can do is tell me that they were in the war and they were a fighter pilot and this is nothing and we got this, and then I could go back to reading my book and not think twice. When they don't say anything, I don't love that. And then when I hear a crack in their voice, I really don't love that. And I think that's what he's trying to say. I had a few of those. Yeah, like he does not sound confident or she does not sound confident when she's saying, buckle up now. And it's the same thing with leadership, which is what this leader was trying to say. But I also think back to my other story, if we don't let people know we're human too, and that we struggle too, there's a balance. And so I really think authenticity is underrated. And I think it's really hard for certain generations. I think it's hard for men more than women. But I also think it's hard for women because if we're authentic, it's too easy to get labeled as soft or too touchy-feely. And so I think we're all wrestling with what it means to be confident and authentic, confident and humble at the same time. And there's some leaders out there that we all aspire to that I think do a really good balance.
Yeah, authenticity and transparency are two of the pillars that I like to talk about all the time. Yeah. And since I don't have a perfect bone in my body, I actually love what you preach.
Me either.
The key thing is being willing to admit it.
Yeah. We teach what we want to learn, right?
That's right. We teach what we want to learn. So, Tina, last question I like to ask everybody in my interviews about gratitude. I really think that the best leaders that are out there have amazing hearts and are actually thankful for the things that happen to them, even if they're not good. Yeah. It rubs off on people. What are you most grateful for today?
Today, I'm going to give you
every day.
Oh, every day. Well, it's so funny you bring this up today because it's November and I do an annual gratitude practice with my leaders. And so all 50 leaders every day for 21 days post on their team's channel something that they're grateful for.
Oh my, that'd be interesting.
It's so neat to watch everybody's because they're a bunch of engineers and they were saying, I like the challenge of finding something every day because the obvious comes out the first week and then you start to look for the little things. And we know through neuroscience that practicing gratitude actually changes the chemistry in your physiology and your biology and your brain. It's just a great practice. But so I'm just going to give you what I wrote today, which was I am so grateful for recipes that introduce me to new spices that I've never heard of. And so I love to cook. And last night I had to look up what the spice was. It's a curry blend that I've never encountered before. And I cook a lot. Like, what is this one? And I'm just delighted by that. But breaking bread, going back to kind of what you and I have in common, breaking bread for me is a way of sitting on the stoop. And there's nothing better than sitting on the stoop and chatting with folks or sitting around a table for hours over a beautiful meal and connecting over food.
Tina, can you make me some pierogies?
I can. Send me your address. Well, I mean, I have to figure out how to get them in the mail to you, but I sure could. Yeah.
Tell you what, you make the pierogies, I'll make the pizza. How about that?
That sounds great. That sounds great. We'll have a pizza and pierogi party.
I love it. Well, Tina, I'd like to thank you. I'd like to tell you that I'm really grateful that you've been on. And thanks so much for joining me on this episode of Off the Rak. I'm really grateful to you for agreeing to be on and also bringing the wisdom that you have inside of you. It's a beautiful thing, and I wish more business leaders could hear the things that you have to say because I think you'd make a real impact in the way that they lead. So thank you again.
Yeah, I have goosebumps. Well, thank you. I mean, what a treat. I was a little nervous to be on today with you, and I'm just so honored. It was a blast, and it's very rare to find people that grew up in a Polish and Italian household. So
Yes, it is.
you had me at pierogi, so I was in. Yeah, it's so lovely to be with you today.
Well, thanks so much. And I'd also like to say thanks to all of the listeners and those of you on video who tuned in. You can always find more insights from our guests through the Off the Rak Plus newsletter. We've got episode highlights, we've got transcripts, helpful takeaways there, and so make sure to check it out. And also check this out. I can't believe that as we near the end of this year, we're closing out our third season of Off the Rak, and I'm so grateful to the fascinating guests who have really joined us over the years and taught us about leadership through our conversations, and thank you for learning along with me. And I as grateful as I am, it's really purpose that I'm going to be turning to in the new year and in the new season. And what better way to start that deep dive in season 4 than to welcome Elliot Kotek, who's the writer, director, and producer of the documentary The Hidden Power of Purpose. So make sure to tune in next season. And we're going to talk a little bit about gratitude, but we're also going to tie it into purpose. And until the new year, I encourage all of you to be human with one another and find a way to have a positive influence on somebody around you each and every day. Thank you, everybody.